Next on our agenda is item number 9, Superintendent's Report, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board. We certainly appreciate the recognition of our school nurses for National Nurses Day. We really appreciate their work. Special thanks to Mr. Will McGinty, who has been battling the birds that we hear in this room. He has found the secret: 6 fake owls. Don't tell the birds, but 6 fake owls have been able to clear that. So we really appreciate the Center for Advanced Technical Studies for hosting us today. We're very excited to bring the results of work that this board has done, especially in the beginning of the year, making a commitment to our capital and to improving our facilities. And so we bring to you tonight on the update on the Chapin High School Stadium. Jumper Carter Cease would like to showcase the Chapin High School Stadium renovations. So I asked Mr. Beatonbow to come forward and bring us that presentation.
Initially to expand the stadium seating capacity. So we've been able to do that and increase the seating capacity to 6,500 seats. But we've also been able to address some additional needs there at Chapin High School. And one is safety and security of not only the student athletes, but students in general and the community that comes to the games. So if you'll notice, we've created a secondary entrance kind of on the northeast side of the stadium, closest to the school. We're going to modify the restroom facilities at the existing main entrance so that home fans can go to one side of that building, the visiting fans can go to the other, and with a little bit of administrative sort of vision overview, you can keep the visiting fans and home fans totally separate during any athletic event. We're also going to take advantage of the topography where the to come out for track and tennis. And then the press box is located strategically right behind the home side stands, but it really creates a boundary and an extension of the classroom environment for the school. So on the ground level, there's opportunity for a classroom type space and some coaches' offices, as well as much needed storage. This is a rendering. The stadium will be very innovative in its use of composite metal panels, but something that ties in with the campus and also celebrates the school colors. And as you can see, kind of centered, there's an overlook, so an opportunity for fans to view games from that perch, as well as the folks working in the concession stands will have a nice view of the playing field as well. And one other thing that I'd like to mention is hopefully this is it's all accessible. So the spaces that are currently under the existing bleachers will be turned into basically storage, but we'll have fully ADA accessible toilets for all of the fans and spectators coming to events at Chapin. And then, as I mentioned, we've been able to expand the learning environment with creating multi-use classroom type spaces at each level of the press box. And then at the top level, the Chapin Student Programming Network has space there. That's a program that's offered at Chapin High School, and so I think the educational opportunities for this facility are also will really enhance the work that the folks at Chapin High School are doing. So with that, we're moving along well from a scheduling standpoint. We're on budget from a construction standpoint, and again, just appreciate this opportunity to share with you some of the work that we've been doing over the last several months. So, thank you very much.
Do we have any questions from the board for Mr. Cease? Ms. Huddle?
So the stands, the existing stands remain, correct? The bulk of them?
Yes.
So what we're adding is end zone, the new stands higher than the original, and the press box.
That's right.
Okay.
And on the visitor side, there's some additional stands there as well. So for a total of 6,500 seats.
Mr. Cease, when I think when we moved from, and correct me if I'm wrong because I don't keep these numbers in my head, but when we moved to 5A in order to hold a playoff game, we right now cannot, hold a playoff game, correct?
Yeah, in the later rounds, that's correct. You've got to have the 6,500 seating capacity.
So when Chapin moved into the higher realm, there was a requirement. So the new seating that we have will qualify us for those 5A football games?
Yes.
Or other games. Or I went to a girls' soccer game the other night, and it was very well attended. So, but just want to make sure that we've got all the bases covered for 5A, because that was the reason why we had to move so quickly, I believe, to accommodate that. With the replacement of Mr. Biedenbaugh, with the replacement of the turf, we're not going to do that, of course, until after the construction on the stadium is complete, because I imagine you might have to put some cranes and vehicles out there.
Yes,
correct?
sir. Yes, sir. We have been working with Mr. Edwards as well. We're going to try to replace the field January, February, after the construction part is done on the field. We can do that. So that's our plan right now, is to do that in January. Also, we'll be able to host band competitions as well. So it's not just athletics. We'll be able to host band competitions with the new seating requirements as well.
Mr.
Ms.
Love it.
Hammond, you have a
You see
question?
I don't know if I hit my little hand up there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I had a question. It may be somebody else though you called on. I didn't hear you.
So, did you have a question?
Yes, I did.
Okay, proceed.
I welcome Mr. Cease. I know the reputation of Jumper Carter for many years, and it's excellent, so I'm excited. But I wanted to ask, I think you talked about the way you've got the concession stands. The actual people that are working those concession stands, they can actually see the game because I'm looking at the drawing, but I thought you said that. I just want to be sure, because I tell you, as a mom squad member at Irmo High, I worked many concession stands and we couldn't see any of the games. So I think that's an exciting part. If I heard you right, I just want to see if I heard that right.
That's correct, Ms. Hammond. Yes, the concession stand is at the overlook with the view of the playing field.
That is great. Love it. Love it. What a great idea. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Or any other, Ms. Moore?
With the phases of the bond referendum and changing the way that Spring Hill would be when it comes to a high school within our district, would that not change our 5A status for Chapin High School?
It could very well, given the growth that we project in Chapin. I believe that once it goes out to capacity, it will still be 5A. So making sure that its capacity matches not only in athletics, but what we project in arts would make sure that the 1,700 capacity would always fit 5A.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on with the next part of our report.
Hey,
Dr. Ross.
Mr. Vice Chair, so I failed to introduce Mary Margaret Stoke. She's one of the young architects working on this project, does an excellent job, and her parents live here in Chapin, so we're excited to be here. So thank you for this opportunity.
Is she here tonight?
She is.
Would you allow her to come up? So your involvement was actually the project architect, so you took this from concept and employed all your skills to make this beautiful rendering and so forth? Well,
Mary Margaret created this rendering that you guys are looking at, and many more parts. So
well, congratulations, Mary Margaret. Thank you for coming back and helping us too.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And this is an example of full circle of District 5 coming back to work on District 5. Speaking of such, I'd like to recognize Mr. Edwards also, who is a product of Chapin High School, who will also be building this beautiful rendering that Mary Margaret has created. So we thank you so much, and we look forward to its utilization. At this time, to go to the other end of the district, we wanted to talk about the work that this board has done to address the west wing at Irmo High School. And in doing so, I know we have some echo. We're working on that whistle sound. We were very excited about the instructional methodology that's going into this building. In hearing so, we are looking at the ability to look at a different way of engaging students. And so we're talking about that, and we brought to this board the notion of Main Street, which meets Mall Street, bringing a small business incubator to Irmo High School, having students who, and some of them are going to four-year college, some are going to two-year college, but members of the board and the community, we have students in school who don't see that 4 year as their path, and we want to make sure that we provide a variety of opportunities for them, and those opportunities would include small business and entrepreneurship. So we're going to give access to the economy right now by allowing these students to open up their own businesses while they're at school, to learn their business models, to work on payrolls, to handle finances. This will be a very innovative practice that we plan to bring to Irmo High School, and we're very excited to bring it in a new building, a new facility that this board has so graciously provided our community. So we're going to ask for community input on how this building will look, how this program will be set up, and we're very thankful to LS3P, the architects, for a very cool way of bringing this forward. So on May 18th, from 5 to 7 p.m. in the auditorium right there at Irmo High School, we invite the community to come in. As they walk into what we call Main Street, which is in front of the auditorium, you'll see this setup with the different stations. We're going to start at 5 o'clock and then quickly move into our stations. And as you sign in, you're going to get a badge, and it's going to allow you to go through each of these 5 stations. Now, what are you going to do at these stations? Well, the first one is a sign-in that allows you to give us feedback. You'll get your feedback form. And then you'll walk through the rest of the stations, and I'll briefly take us through. The first one is like Legos. It's the building blocks. This is the opportunity to look at the topography of the site, look at the limitations that we have on the site, and you can actually build a model scale of what that new wing would be. We're really excited because our classes and our students will be working on this themselves with the architects. So they'll see the square footage limitations, the limitations in terms of instructional, administrative, media, and other core spaces, and they'll have an opportunity to build those on the Irmo High School site to give the architects some idea of just what they would see in their building. Station 2 is really the identity of Irmo High School. It's called This is Irmo, and so you'll get a sticky pad. You'll write what you believe Irmo is, and put that feedback on that board. And the architects work this into the design. As we talked about, Irmo High School has a proud tradition, and we want to make sure that that tradition shows up in the new building. When the members of the community come in and talk about their vision, what IRMO means to them, these identities, these themes will be shown in the final product. In terms of the outlay of the building, we have looking back and dreaming forward, paying homage at Station 3 to the history of the school. And so you'll go up to these boards and you get dots, and you will place dots on some interior spaces that you believe should show up in the new wing, that honor the interior spaces that we have in the old wings. And dreaming forward is an opportunity to look at things that may not have ever existed at IRMO High School. But this is an opportunity to look at what are some elements that we want to put in our school that have never existed before. So we're excited about this. We'd like to see what the community will add for their schools. So this will be on, again, Wednesday on May the 18th. We invite the community to come out to help us design our IRMO High School. From this community input, LS3P will come back just like Jumper Carter Cease did today and present the findings. So at this time, we stand for questions on this part of the presentation.
Does anyone from the board have a question? Dr. Ross, I wanted to ask you something to clarify. These two projects that we've presented tonight, those have already been funded through 8% money. And we had some questions from our constituents about the source of the 8% money. And then we've also been talking about, and I think you can present later in your program, about a $150 million bond referendum, which is entirely different. That would take voters to have to vote on that issue in November. Would you bring us up to speed with that?
Yes, sir, and I'll touch on it again when I get into the presentation of the bond, but each year our board can be brought forth what we call our 8% capital, meaning that we can borrow or sell general obligation bonds to the total of 8% of the total assessed value of all property and assets we have in our attendance zone. So 8% of that is the limit. If we wanted 8.1%, it would have to go to the voter for approval, anything over that 8%. The projects that you're looking at now are within that 8%. And so as we address other needs within our district, it would require us to go over that 8%. So this is all funded under the cap, under those 8% funds. We will always have those within. We really appreciate the board moving us from that $10 million capital project program to the $15 million, which allows us to do more. So this is all under that 8% cap. Anything that needs to go over that would require the voters' approval.
So the 8% cap includes $15 million of annual maintenance, and I think that 15 includes $3 million for technology. Okay, and I see Mr. Biedenbaugh shaking his head. So, but the major projects that we are accomplishing are the Chapin High School football stadium. It won't be just for football. I keep saying that. I'm sorry. And then the IRMO High School new East Wing. But other than that, there are other projects, am I correct, that are smaller in nature, but are also included in the 8% money?
That's correct. And remember, you have this year after year after year, and so we keep track of it by its fiscal year capital program. We have approved the fiscal year 23 capital, and so we're excited about the projects that we'll have. One that's we're going to be talking about today, track or buses, activity buses. These are major capital projects that we do. We would really classify this on maintenance, to keep our buildings maintained, ongoing maintenance for our buildings. While we can do large construction pieces, is to really make sure that our facility space stays in good repair.
Okay, and any more questions from the board?
All right, well, we hope everyone can come out who's able on Wednesday, May 18th at Irmo High School as we design the future of that site.
Ms. Hammond, do you have a question? No.
Okay. She's speaking.
Wave your hand.
Okay.
I had one. I wanted to piggyback something you said, though, Mr. Lovelace, that before we went ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. I appreciate you getting Dr. Ross to clarify, because I think there was an article in the paper that I had several calls about that were confused, and you did a great job of clarifying it, Mr. Lovelace, with your questions and also with Dr. Ross's answer. But I did want to just reiterate to the public that some of the things that were in the state paper were not accurate as far as these two projects that were just presented are done with or without the bond. So I don't know why that got confused, but for bringing that up.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ross, I'm sorry I cut you off. I just saw her hand go up, and it was board time. So.
No problem whatsoever. So as always, I like to open up our superintendent's report with the 3 critical questions that guides our work. Why, which is our vision, how, which is our mission, and what the valued outcomes that we have, the academic, social, and emotional growth and development of our children. Members of the board and the community, I will submit one of the number one issues that we have challenging the outcomes that we seek, providing our community with educated citizenry who are prepared to meet the challenges both socially and emotionally of the world, is mental health. This is something that we are challenged with, and we are working constantly to address each and every day. So in terms of addressing this through our mission, we use this umbrella. This umbrella is a representation of all that it takes for a child to be educated, from their physical safety all the way to their educational needs. This continuum allows us to meet those needs in a very systematic way. One of the things that we wanted to address is the notion of behavioral needs and its relation to mental health and academic readiness. And we feel that there's a gap that we can fill when it comes to things such as bullying. And so I wanted Dr. Harris at this time, our Chief of Student Services and Planning, to come forward and talk about this new method in which we're going to address that gap for that behavioral mental health connection continuum. Dr. Harris?
Thank you, Dr. Ross and members of the board, our general community. Appreciate an opportunity just to say a word about this whole child continuum as it relates to the topic of bullying. And this is one that's obviously very familiar to us all, and we've heard or have experienced or have known about it in one way or another. And I do think that it warrants visitation as well as conversation periodically and intermittently throughout the course of the year. Having said that, I think it's also important that we begin in the beginning, and that is to clearly identify what bullying is. And there you have on the screen a description or a definition that is used at the federal, state, and our local levels that defines bullying. And it simply indicates that bullying is unwanted, aggressive behavior that involves a real or perceived power imbalance, and the behavior is often repeated. In conversations, you might even hear that there is a pattern of behaviors, but the behaviors are repeated or has the potential to be repeated over time. And I think that's a working definition that we have adopted here in School District 5, and one in which I might add that we incorporated even during our Parents' Night Out here recently where we had 3 of those series of sessions and topics for our parents and our general community. But to understand bullying, I think part 2 of that is to also understand the varying degrees and the different types of bullying. I think it's important to understand that they, in my own definition, are ranging from the lowest level to the intermediate to the highest level forms of bullying. That lowest level there in that first bullet indicates that's examples of verbal bullying, where there is teasing or name calling, taunting, and perhaps even the threatening of harm. That intermediate level incorporates social bullying, where it's relational. Oftentimes, students and persons are acquainted with persons who they are familiar with or have some form of relationship with, and that causes hurting someone's reputation or the relationship in and of itself. Spreading rumors, embarrassing scenarios in public, or leaving someone out on purpose. Even to the highest level of physical bullying, where there are hitting and kicking and pushing, hurting someone physically and or their possessions. So having understood the definition and what it is, and how it's defined at various levels, understanding the varying types and degrees of bullying, I think it's also important to understand that there are various strategies and interventions that we have in District 5 to address that. And I'm going to refer to on the left-hand side of this page that you see here. These are built upon the Student Code of Conduct Handbook, and and these interventions can involve one case or one student, or they might involve multiple students who might be involved or cited in a particular case. Our Student Services Officer, in collaboration and partnership with our schools who have been trained over the course of the year by various experts in the area, do a yeoman's job, I believe, in addressing that left-hand side where that aggressor or the perpetrator is often cited. We have talked much about our Stop It Solutions app, which has no shortage of reports on a daily basis of the different things that are at least reported and are followed up by our administrators. With these interventions from parent involvement, referral to counseling, school-based discipline. But then there are scenarios where it escalates to expulsion processes and procedures. And students have been, while there is no one in District 5 who has any interest in looking for persons to expel, there are scenarios and there are times where students have been, because of behaviors that have been egregious enough, that have been expelled and expulsion procedures have been meted. This, of course, is followed by and as a result of very thorough investigations, and law enforcement obviously is involved with that. Oftentimes may, in fact, involve Title IX scenarios that we discover in the investigation, and of course, legal counsel is involved. All of that takes place over on the left-hand side of this continuum, if you will. I think we've done a great job of addressing those as we know them and as they are reported to us. But to the point of what Dr. Ross has referred to in his opening comments or statements, and I'm sure will offer other thoughts at the conclusion of this, we are increasing our efforts for greater consistency in terms of what happens and how we best address what we would say the alleged victim, in terms of the mental health of the alleged victim. And I want to put a pin here and say that when we talk about mental health, though it is cited on the right-hand side of this particular chart, mental health is appropriate for both the victim and or the aggressive perpetrator. So what I say here can really go on either side of this particular continuum. But when we're know about those scenarios, and obviously parent involvement and referral to administration and counseling, and you have been supportive of making certain that we have 9 clinical counselors in the various geographical areas to help support the work and the efforts that go on here in School District 5. But coupled with them, school-based mental health and social workers and school psychologists continue to make in-district as well as out-of-district referrals that support the well-being of those students who have been victimized or have allegedly been victims of bullying scenarios here in School District 5. So I simply conclude by saying this is that is an area, if there's a punchline on what I would have to share, it is just that while we have put forth lots of work and interventions and trainings in terms of addressing the aggressor and the perpetrator, it is our purpose and our point, our passion to move forward with increased efforts and greater consistency and making certain that even to or inclusive that the victim is also receiving his or her interventions to address the concerns that they may have. And I say that this is a shared responsibility. Schools and district offices can only respond to what we know. I would encourage parents and students that if you are experiencing and if there are scenarios that you know of, to make certain that they're reported so that they can be followed up and that we can employ either one or many or all and others that are not listed interventions that you see listed here. So with that, I'm going to conclude. Dr. Ross, I turn that back over to you this time.
Well, thank you, Dr. Harris, and we're really excited about this program, basically splitting the referrals in two. Our assistant principals and AAPs and counselors, we deal with the aggressor a lot through that referral system. But to split that referral and now have someone intentionally going after, and I know we use the word victim, but that person who's been victimized by that they have someone reaching out with them. So that intentionality covers it, and as Dr. Harris says, it's really on both sides that help is need. Hurt people, and so we want to make sure that we are addressing both sides of that. But this is a way to connect that continuum. So are there any questions about this before we move on?
Ms. Huddle.
I have two, but I'll just say one now and give everybody else a chance. One thing I didn't know, because I've heard from some parents who are concerned because their child was the victim of bullying and they see the bullier back in school the next day and they're reading the code of conduct and they don't get it. But one of the things that you told me that I wasn't aware of is that if a child has an IEP, if they get very close or at that 10 days, it's nearly impossible, and that's a federal law, right? It's nearly impossible to remove the child from school, correct?
I'll let Dr. Harris speak to that. He works with it daily.
I think, Ms. Holder, you described that all but near perfectly. You're exactly right. There are federal regulations and statutes that are in place that oftentimes you might hear them as protections, if you will, that govern how how schools across the land address students who have been identified with special needs. A little bit different than the student who's in a traditional program, and it does limit, if you will, the way in which you address that student and how often, how frequent, and to what degree you would address that student. So you're absolutely right. There are those things in play that play into much of what we often will hear and much of what parents might share with us, with you, or others as it relates to scenarios that might include bullying.
Ms. Moore.
A follow-up question from your answer and Ms. Huddle's question. Is there anything in place that says that we get to a certain point with a child that has an IEP where we can step in and intervene and that child is no longer protected, so to speak? I mean, there has to be a point where we get to a child who has continuously done X, Y, and Z where that IEP cannot protect them so much more, right?
That, Ms. Moore, gets into an arena that I think requires a little more in-depth response than what I'm actually comfortable giving you right now. I do understand your question, and that is there a point where there's basically a cutoff where we don't have to provide those protections? And as I don't know that exists at this point. However, I will say this, is that along the way, there are interventions and there are strategies that are put into place through IEP teams that are to address those students who have along the way. It is not a matter of waiting until the maximum amount of time that student can be out. It is happening along the way early on. And those things have to be addressed early on in order for a continuation of additional services or changing the locations, so forth, take place.
Because I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from a parent, is because as I believe that every child has an opportunity, they are our children, for goodness sakes. I think sometimes the perception is that we would rather than allow this child, because they have an IEP, more time than we would the other child who is being bullied. And I think that's where parents get frustrated, because then they feel like, okay, so if my child had an IEP, they would be more protected. There's just this gray area where I think parents who do not have children who have IEPs and who don't understand everything that you may and our teachers may be putting into the intervention, that's where they're banging their head against a wall, feeling like we are not doing anything to truly protect these kids. So that's why I ask these questions, is just to shed light on these parents who feel like they have contacted the school and they have, their kid has spoken up and still nothing happens. And I know that things are happening, but to them, they feel like nothing's happening because it's a repeated incident.
Sure. Well, certainly I appreciate the question, and I certainly understand the thought as I shared, and I do understand how frustrating it can be. And I think to make this conversation full circle, I think it suggests as to why there is increased efforts to do more than what we've done before to ensure that all of the students, regardless of what side of the fence, if I can use that analogy, they might fall, that they are getting what they need in order to equip them to be better students.
Ms. Blackburn-Hines.
I'm going to kind of piggyback on the previous two questions. Can you kind of talk about what type of disability or IEP subject matter may actually allow a student to stay in school when it's bullying or there's fighting or something like that? Like, what types of situations would qualify? Any student that has an IEP, are there certain, criteria that play into that? And also, for the student that's being bullied, what type of physical protections do they have if their perpetrator is not allowed to leave school or be removed from the situation because of that IEP? Because I absolutely agree with what Ms. Moore said
Certainly.
regarding the parents' concern.
So if I understand the question, I'm going to give a very short answer to the first part of that, and that is that all of the students who are identified as having IEP are covered. They are protected. They have the protections in place. I'll go a step further and say that there is a such thing as students who have a what's called a Section 504 accommodation plan. They too have protections in place as well. Okay. Second part of your question is, what does the student do? Or what protection in place for the student who does not have the 504 or who does not have an IEP? What's in place for them to assist that student? And that's where it's important that persons like I have Ms. Felkel and Ms. Hook who are here, and others who are professionals in our district who are meeting and collaborating and putting their brains together to find ways in which to address that. That's why law enforcement becomes a critical part of what we do. Even our relationships, internal and external to the district, are all important, because it's a matter of making those connections to find the right solution for the individual student.
Dr. Harris, does anybody, I wanted to ask a question. When you talk about intervention, and what comes to my mind is the first step in that would maybe a mediation. Do we do that where we bring all parties and all parents together in one room? And I know, when I was a kid, that, all you had to do is bring my dad in, and that kind of stopped things. So,
Sure.
Do we do that still with that kind of relationship where we bring in all parties, or do we not do that?
And Mr. Lovers, all you had to do was tell me, just say the word dad to me, and that got me straight. But there are opportunities. I'm asking Ms. Felkel to come forward, just kind of talk a little bit about interventions as well. In terms of mediation, does that happen? It does happen. I think it has a lot to do with, what occurs. If for example, if you go back to, If I go back to the types of bullying, you know, that first level of intervention where there are teasing and name calling, I think there's opportunity and room for that to occur. And I do believe that those things are happening. But when you get into the physical, that may not be the most appropriate strategy. So we have to find other strategies in which to do that. And that's where I talked about professional staff coming together and looking at what's in the best interest of not only the aggressive student, but also the student who has been allegedly victimized. And maybe you want to come talk just a little bit about some of the other interventions through clinical counseling and others that you might want to share.
I think part of that's a great question. I think part of that is that we have to look at every child looks different. Every situation is different. What they come to the table with, what that family looks like is different. So when we pull together with that IEP team, with your school psychologists, with your teachers, we look not only with those internal systems within the school system, but also external systems. And it might be our D5 clinical team, it might be our school-based mental health team with DMH, or it might be an outside provider. But I think we have to have a roadmap that looks different and unique for each situation. And some of those diagnoses, like you mentioned, does impact how they react to situations. And having to help our teachers retrain some of that information, how do we make sure that we don't escalate students who are heightened with some of their diagnoses that they might have, but also for the students who do not have an IEP, how do we help them too? And one thing that Dr. Harris mentioned that I wanted to make sure that we understand is that a student who is alleged the victim, sometimes the perpetrators have been victims themselves, because that's a cycle. So we want to get in there and really work with that family system and with that child system to figure out what are extra coping skills that we can provide that whole child, so that when that situation happens again, they will have that tool to pull out of their toolbox, so they'll know how to help themselves when that time happens again, if that helps. But I think, again, it goes back to individualizing each and every situation. That's where the IEP comes into hand, to know what's worked, what has not, and work with the whole child.
Any other questions? Ms. Huddle?
I'm curious about like the hitting, kicking, pushing. I mean, that's assault. So, at what point, this is a two-part question. At what point does the SRO get involved? And also, is that an exception for the limitations on an IEP? I mean, if a child with an IEP is physically assaulting another child, can they still be removed from the school?
The first part of your question, Ms. Huddle, is that following an investigation, looking into a matter, understanding what is and what is not, that will determine whether or not it will be considered a rough horseplay versus a physical assault. I don't know, I certainly won't stand and tell you that every scenario is a physical assault, because it's not. There are varying degrees of all of these. So the investigation is gonna determine a large part of that. Obviously, contingent upon what we do determine, what schools determine, will also dictate how and when law enforcement is involved as well. So law enforcement may in fact be involved in from a counseling opportunity with the student and or family to an actual arrest or charges being filed. It runs the gamut on both sides of that.
How about the IEP as far as, are there exceptions if, based on, are certain offenses exempted from the 10-day limit?
Law enforcement would tell you that an assault is an assault is an assault. And it would have to be addressed now. Now, while it may be an assault for the student who has an IEP, and let's say they're at their 8th or 9th day of suspension, the assault does not necessarily go away. The assault is what it is if that's the case. However, the intervention may look different for that student versus the student who does not have the IEP. Okay, and that's where the IEP team has to come together and determine what that might look like.
Any other questions from the board? None. Dr. Ross, would you continue?
We thank you, Ms. Hook, Ms. Falco, and Dr. Harris for that. And I think, that's another example of how this continuum bridges from one group to the next. We may also bring in Dr. Slatton, who works specifically with Dr. Harris on those issues of IEPs, the intent, whether it's Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, or the idea, which is we have the IEP, is to level the playing field. And so that's basically the textbook version of these IEPs, is to level the playing field. It's that team that meets that determine if it's level or unlevel. I think, to Dr. Harris's point, I have not seen in my experience the removal of a student with the IEP past those 10 days. Now, you can do a manifestation determination. You can do due process. These are very involved processes that I believe involve the Office of Civil Rights. And so we are working before we get to those, and I believe, as Dr. Harris said, by addressing the victim, these victim services, what we see, and Ms. Hook and Ms. Felkel have seen this and have testified that sometimes that drives the aggressor behavior. Unmet victims come right back as aggressors. And so we believe that having these services on both ends can meet that. And that's why we also want to highlight this month as Mental Health Awareness Month. This is a time that we pause and take the stigma away from mental health. This is something that a lot of families deal with. It's impacting our schools. As of March 31st, we had 8,100 incidences that hit our social workers past the school level. Of those, about 22% were mental health support issues that we needed. The other made up of issues of getting kids to school for attendance, meeting basic social needs, student support, parent interactions, homelessness, and 288 suicide evaluations. So our schools are gripped with the impacts of mental health, and we're working each and every day to provide this continuum. You will see a budget presented to you this evening, and in that budget we are repurposing positions. So this is not an increase in position. It's using the existing positions that we have, repurposing them to provide a continuum to fill those gaps. So to take our nursing services to a year-round support. We opened up this school year planning for opening up in a pandemic, and we did not have a year-round nurse to guide us through creating this green through red system. We want to be ahead of the game there. In terms of the mental health gap, we would like a mental health services officer. Again, these are not new positions. These are positions we're taking our existing administrative positions and repurposing those. But this person would work with the student services officer so that we had that coordination that we have just outlined with you today. And then another driver of the behavioral issues is just the lack of connecting these students with the needs to get them ready academically. And so a lead school counselor would allow us to help our families meet the right needs for their children. So in this budget, you'll see the philosophy on creating a continuum that makes sure that these gaps are filled. With that, I would like to move on to the other part of our mission.
Can I interrupt you just a second?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Hammond, I think you had your hand up. Ms. Gardner told me, and for a question, and I didn't see you. You're a little tiny. You're only about that big on my screen, so I'm having
Really
trouble
tiny.
with that.
Well, see, I can count on that secretariat to keep us straight. Thank you. No, I really did. I feel like we probably should move on, but I had a teacher experience to talk about that IEP. I was just going to say it would be really good for the board to understand how what are the categories and how parents get these IEPs, because we as teachers do see. I'd like to know that the district has a very strict guidelines to who gets an IEP, because we see as teachers, because we're on committees, where some people try to get them and they really should not get one, because it is about a way to get out of how to behave. So that's just that just makes it more complicated, but I hope that Dr. Harris, and I'm sure he is with his experience, and Dr. Ross would just be very careful when parents do, because there's some very needed IEPs, but I think it can get abused. And I just hope we have a way that we are very strict in our committees and what the criteria is, and that it's met before kids can just easily become an IEP student, so that they don't have to be accountable for their behavior, because it certainly disrupts school. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
That's it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So we'd like to move on to a huge part of our mission statement is providing a safe, secure, and equitable learning environment for our students. And that brings me to the guiding principles that we have discussed, initiating from our facilities committee. And we talked about community analysis and facility needs assessment, enrollment projections, the instructional plan review, and that plan. And I'll bring to our board for the latest installment of our Building Our Education Foundation for our district. We like to say that we are 3 communities, but we're one family, one district. And so we asked our community, this was last week, for input on this plan. And this is our first phase, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board. We're going to do another round after we've had this presentation. But we asked this to be interactive. So on the first one, the question is, what attendance zone that of the community did you live in? And so the results of this poll show the majority of those that were in attendance that night were 15. We asked, we talked about the mental health. We also talked about the impact of poverty on proficiency. I want to make it very clear that poverty is not a determinant of your educational outcomes, but statistically and nationally what we see is that there is an impact of poverty on proficiency because of the increased needs that we see. We feel that just in as we work with our teaching staff, as 51% of our resignations just comes from one area of our district. So we know that we need additional resources in order to overcome those opportunity gaps that exist in areas of high poverty and high need. Our poverty index as a district is 43%. However, it's not equally distributed amongst the district. If we drill down on a community level, we just see the span of need that we have within our district. And so it represents some of the most affluent communities in the state and some of the most impoverished communities of the state. And so we wanted to make sure that we brought a instructional plan that addresses all of our students that we have. But if we overlay our district and that poverty index, and we overlay it with the conditions of the facilities, we see that our fair and poor rated facilities are located in our areas of high poverty. And our students there, as has been indicated by this board, deserve the best that we can provide. And we know that if you layer all of these things we talked about tonight, the social issues, the mental health issues, the poverty's impact on proficiency, and the facilities, you keep layering each one of these over and over, these have an impact on academic achievement. They can't be looked at in a vacuum. And looking at, now there's a lot of different things that you can do to rate schools, or you can disagree with the methodologies. But families look online when they're picking, when they're out of town and they're picking schools to move to. And we want parity in all of our schools. If 3 of our 4 high schools are in the top 15 in the state, and we believe all of our high schools should be there. And so we appreciate this board looking at the investments, specifically at Irmo High School, because we believe that investments in those areas will drive an opportunity to change this map in a way that gets families out of poverty and not perpetually serve families in poverty. And I'll say that again, your investment in these areas of high poverty, we believe, will change this map to get children out of poverty and families out of poverty and not perpetually serve those in poverty. So if we look at the current program in which we deliver the greatest educational outcomes as outlined by our board policy, this is our current, the current map that we have. Whereas in the blue area, we have Chapin High School as the only school rated fair, addressing parity in the arts. At Dutch Fork High School in the Dutch Fork zone, we have the need for renovations at Dutch Fork High School, the fair rated Dutch Fork Elementary School, Crossroads Intermediate, which needs renovations, Irmo High School, which you have addressed, Irmo Middle School, which needs update and renovations, the Seven Oaks Elementary School security concerns, and the issues of the walls at Harbison West and Nursery Road. Our goal with this building plan is to move our district from this delivery method to this delivery method, where there are no schools in our district that are not rated either good or excellent. Again, to move from this to this format, where all schools are rated either good or excellent. This is the extent of the referendum. And so we are using the 2019 district-wide facilities study to make that recommendation for 3 of the options, or specifically 2 that address just the fair and the the fair and the poor rated facilities. Before the public input session, this was the recommendation that we had. The professional development wing at the district office, which would be added on to the current allotment of funds that have been placed out for the base of the district office. The moving and transitioning the Crossroads 6th grade transition to 2 6th grade academies at Dutch Fork Middle School and Irmo Middle School. So we would have 2 6th grade academies on both sites. We had Crossroads Early Childhood Center renovations. Nursery Road would be this would move into the Crossroads space, be remodeled for $21,700,000, and then move back into Nursery Road. Harbison West Elementary was to go into the Crossroads site and stay. At that point, we reported to the community that it was our intent to sell Harbison West. We proposed a new Dutch Fork Elementary School, and to use the current site of Dutch Fork Elementary for the Rosenwald Rich Lex building for all alternative education programs. To give Seven Oaks Elementary School security upgrades, Chapin High School is parity with its fine arts building. As you saw, the wonderful outline for jumper Carter seats for stadiums. We're going to do the same, not everything there, but we were going to do stadium renovations for Dutch Fork and Irmo, and then address the Dutch Fork High renovations that are needed in that building. And we had an allotment of $1.6 million for security upgrades. That was prior to the public input session. Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board, we have listened to the community. Very specifically, we heard loud and clear from Ms. Kim Benson of the Harbison community, Mr. James Carper, and Mr. Bruce Innocenti, the president of the Quail Valley Civic Association. And their concern was the Harbison West transition. They met with myself and Mr. Beatonbow in addition to the feedback that we received, and we have now changed our our recommendation. So after public input, we are going back to the drawing board as we continue to take in this input from the community. So I want the public to know that we are listening, trying to take this in. We will have another opportunity for the community to give more input before we bring a final project list. So nothing's in stone even at this point, but this is an opportunity to hear from the community and to make sure that we have a plan that addresses our community's needs. And so the only change that we have made here has been in relationship to Harbison West. That was the issue that I think we heard the most. At this point, you'll see that we have removed the security upgrades, and we're going to address those in the capital projects. But that 1.6 combined with efficiencies that we will get at Crossroads, we will not have the early childhood center at Crossroads. Now, listening to the community, hearing their input, is to keep Harbison West in our, as we call our portfolio, that it would always be District 5 property. We were informed, or I was informed, it's my fault, that Harbison West was donated to our school district for educational purposes. As we look back at this plan, we still believe that the K through 5 program needs to be at Crossroads. But if you are currently at, and that's because right now at Harbison West, the way we utilize it without having walls, it's one of the only elementary schools that doesn't have access to a science lab and other build-outs. They'll get that brand new space, renovated space at Crossroads. But the existing Harbison West on Crossbow, that will be the Early Childhood Education Center. By making that the Early Childhood Education Center, we save money because it's already closely aligned to what we can do there. We're also excited as I came to Dr. Harris after the community input and said, what are some of the things that we could do there? And he's researching the opportunities we have through CERDEP. CERDEP is a program that the state is really pushing behind to provide full day 4K instruction, to see students in kindergarten remediation. And Ms. Miller can attest to that kindergarten readiness number. Getting students early by having the Harbison West Early Childhood Education Center allows us, especially in the areas of high need, to address those early learning initiatives and to use the CERDEP funding. We believe that this would be an amazing add or benefit for our school district, especially in the areas of high need. We talked, Mr. Vice Chair, about early childhood and offerings that we could provide for our teachers and staff. But we can also now build out to really address the needs of the students in that community, the families in that community. So we're really excited about this. Again, we learned a lot from the first round of community input. We are not ready to bring a final list of proposals yet because we want to hear another round of community input. And that will be a lunch and learn. So this will be during the lunch break on May 17th. We'll start at noon and end at 1:30 for those who would like to have another opportunity to share their thoughts and opinions on what the project should be. And as we heard from Quail Valley and Harbison community, was really good in making sure that we got the best options before this board. So just as a reminder, you asked about where this money is coming from. We're presenting two things tonight. One is this evening we're going to be talking about the operations side, and that's the funds that we use to pay our staff. At this time, we're talking about debt service. That's those 8% funds that we use in order to do construction, technology, equipment, and renovations. So specifically, when we talk about a bond referendum, we're really talking about a spending card that's limited to 8% of the assessed value of all of the assets in our attendance zone. But as was stated early, we do 8% every year for annual maintenance. If we wanted to go over 8%, that requires the voter to approve. Here are the numbers. So the total assessed value is $586,383,014. We see option 1, we would live at that 8% limit. But as outlined, a lot of that has been used for the Irmo High School project. Option 2, we would go up to 58% of the assessed value. That's $340 million. That would require an increase in taxes. Option 3 and 4 do not require an increase in taxes. It just requires the approval to go over the 8%. So again, no increase in taxes, but we would need approval to go over the 8%. So that would bring, as we shared, the options. These are the options that we're currently working with the board. Option 1, we do not take action, but as you'll see in the total plan, as we talk about enrollment, that this would have to, we would have to address rezoning across the district. Option 2 does increase the taxes. You'll see that this change with the 3 asterisks based on the estimates we have with inflationary impact. Option 3 and 4, we do not require increase of taxes. And option 4, there's actually a small decrease as going to be measured out from the interest and payoff time. So we asked the community, what are of the following new construction projects is most important to you? No one voted for the professional development area, but the most important was the 6th grade academies at Dutch Fork Dutch Fork Middle and Irmo Middle, followed by the new Dutch Fork Elementary, and then the new Chapin Fine Arts. We asked which of the modifications was most important, and the result was the relocation of the Academy for Success and the 5 program to the Rosenwald Richlex building, followed by the Harbison West School remodel, and there was a tie for 7 Oaks Nursery Road and Crossroads. Again, we'll ask this question again on the 17th and see how, if there are any differences. How are this being funded? We asked Jay Glover with PFM to put together models that we could show you. That line represents the cap. That's our current millage, growing at a conservative 1.5% a year. Everything in white under the cap to our existing debt, which is in the gray, is the amount that we could borrow without raising that tax. If you take the cap off, if you take the line off, in option 2, you'll see that to service some of this debt under option 2, you would need to go as high as 103.68 mils. The gray, again, is our existing debt. The yellow is the Irmo High School project. The red is that 8% that we will have to do every year for annual maintenance. The blue would be the bond referendum debt. If we look at option 3, we put the cap back on, and so this is how we would finance that project. Again, you see the gray, the yellow, the red, and the blue. And under option 4, again, with the cap lowered 1 mil, you could see that the funds would be available. And so this is why the voters would need to weigh in, because this is truly a community decision as the payout goes throughout 2038. We believe that this method is the sustainable decision because of the projected growth. And as we look at, regardless if there's a passage or non-passage, or we pursue a bond or we don't pursue it, we do need to handle the growth. If we look at our district in 2013, 25% of the in-person seats were in Chapin. Right now, it's 38%. And so as we recognize that our schools, our students are moving to the Chapin area schools, but the buildings are in the Irmo area. And so the decision that we have to make is in terms of the school utilization factor. How full do we want those existing buildings before we rezone them back to the available buildings? As we talk with our teachers and we talk with our administrators about what those numbers are in terms of capacity, we're hearing within the 80 to 85% is that threshold of where things become uncomfortable. Now, there are options of using portables and to increase, but I don't believe that's the most sustainable solution. So as we look at the schools that are already over or at or over this threshold, again, they're in Chapin. Chapin High School, Lake Murray, Chapin Elementary School, even though Irmo Elementary is right at that cusp right now, but the lion's share, Chapin Intermediate, are in Chapin. And so as we look at the growth that we saw based on our demographers' findings, Chapin High School is slated to grow the fastest over the next 10 years. What we see in terms of the 5th and 6th grade at Chapin Intermediate School, we see a very healthy growth there as well. And so our goal is to be very inclusive and to address that within the scope of what we're trying to do with the referendum, to have a very complete plan. So in review, we are currently delivering our educational model this way. After the referendum, we would hope to look to have this model. Because of growth, and we can stop here after the referendum, but we do need to address growth. And so because of that, we have proposed phase 3. Phase 3 is with the referendum passed, if it passed, and because of that growth, this is the outline of what would happen. We would move Ballantyne into the Chapin zone, rezone the Chapin cluster, and we would have a sustainable K through 5 in the elementary. The middle schools, which CIS would move to Chapin Middle School. Chapin Middle School would move to Spring Hill Middle School, and those would be 6th, 7th, and 8th to have parity to what we would do in Dutch Fork and Irmo Middle School. We also believe that this model would not sustain, and that if that did not sustain, then we would offer phase 4. I believe that all of these phases, whether 3 or 4, we would ask for, whenever the decision is made, that we have a professional demographer to just go back and check our numbers and to check this philosophy. The poll question was asked, if the referendum passes, which phase do you prefer? The lion's share of the community was in favor of phase 3. The next part, I will be very honest, Madam Chair, members of the board, is something that we will need continual study of, and that is if the referendum does not pass, because there are a lot of options there. This is a draft option A. We can go to a lot of different draft options. We're not sold on any of them. The one option is to go ahead and make the combined our current delivery in Irmo and Dutch Fork, with the Phase 4 approach. We could rebalance some schools out of Irmo and Dutch Fork to provide parity, especially when it comes to Harbison West, serving both communities. There's another option. We can add portables at schools of high growth and stay in our current delivery method. So we would ask for help and assistance from a professional on exactly what we would do if this option is selected. But we have to address the growth that we have in Chapin, and that needs to be addressed whether the bond passes or not, or whether we pursue a bond or not. So again, I will we end it with those 4 options, and we ask which option which you prefer the Board of the Trustees, which of the options before the Board of Trustees do they prefer? And again, we'll ask this question again on May 17th, but the option at that time was option 3, heavily favored, followed by option 1, then 2, and then option 4 was the least. Again, this was the first round of public input. We will do another round. We asked them how would they prefer to be notified of any updates, and the lion's share asked to be updated with through email. So that is again where we are in terms of this ongoing discussion. We look forward to more input from the community as we bring these needs to our community and our board. So at that time, that concludes the superintendent's report, and I stand for any questions.
Okay, board members, do you have any questions about the last portion, Ms. Huddle?
When on Ballantyne Elementary, I believe that's a split feeder now where the majority of the students go on to the Dutch Fork cluster, and about 25 or so maybe go to Chapin Intermediate. In the proposal where Ballantyne would shift into the Chapin cluster, correct me if that would be mainly the building, but most of the students would actually stay, because we wouldn't try to overburden Chapin more than it's already. Okay.
Great clarification. In this model, the 25 students that currently go to Chapin would go to Chapin. The 518 students, if we were to do this today, that are in Dutch Fork would still go to Dutch Fork. But those are the students that would go to Dutch Fork schools. The reason we need those additional spaces in Chapin is to bring K through 5 Chapin students into this building. So the building moves into Chapin. The students who are currently zoned for Dutch Fork will continue to be zoned for Dutch Fork. And as the rollout happens, when we look at all of these phases working out, we would work with those families so that we would be the minimal disruption. So it's not that, all right, today you're at Ballantyne, tomorrow you're at Oak Point, working through to make sure that we can phase this in. So, but that's the goal, to get sustainable, is to not build more buildings out in Chapin, but to use our existing buildings to meet that need. With this format, with Piney Woods, Chapin Elementary, Lake Murray Elementary, and Ballantyne, we now gain 3,334 seats in the elementary for currently 2,400 students in the elementary grades. So you're essentially bringing all of your elementary schools to about 72% school utilization factor, instead of some being at the 90s and the 80s. And we believe that that will allow us to meet those future growth gains. But as we invest back into Irmo, we believe that families will choose to go all across our district, Irmo, Dutch Fork, and Chapin, to find to good impact. So we believe that's the sustainable solution. Long answer, I guess.
Ms. Blackburn-Hines.
I have some questions about Harbison West. So one of the concerns that I've heard from folks about Harbison West moving to Crossroads is because it's a neighborhood school and a lot of, I guess what I'm hearing is that there's concerns about transportation and moving those students to where they'd have to either get on a bus, or it causes issues with other siblings or children that may be in a home that's close by. Has that been thought out? I'm sure that it has, but what is that looking like? That's my first question. So.
Great question. And those are one of the things we talked about. Students who ride their bikes or walk to school would continue to be able to walk to Harbison West or ride their bikes to Harbison West. That'll be their bus stop to the Crossroads area. We are trying to balance the goal of using our resources to provide the maximum educational outcomes. And so while what's important is their walk to school, what's equally as important is their experience while at school. And if you go through the halls and see that we provide students science labs and extra art spaces in the building, that we do not provide those students now at Harbison West. So it's not the best decision, but it was a reason that it received that poor rating. And so allowing those students to have an educational environment that we believe will be akin to the rest of the district is why we're going to make that very hard change. But we do recognize that its proximity for those K-12, for those K-5 students would change. I don't know how many currently walkers or riders we have. I don't know that number. But we do still service bus routes to Harbison West now. So, but hearing from the community, we do recognize its value and for future growth, we may need that site. But we believe taking the current site and putting it as a early childhood center is the win-win there.
Can I ask a follow-up question since you just said that? Okay, regarding the Early Childhood Center, how does this address the security issues that we've talked about at Harbison West? And the $200,000 number seems extremely low for any type of renovations compared to anything else on this list. And when we're bringing our youngest folks into that building, all of that combined is a little concerning.
Well, and I'll let Mr. Beedenbow add in where I missed, but the $200,000 is because we don't need as much of an upgrade to change that area in terms of walls. The pod system really works well for early childhood. Our main concern was the security. That lower level path we're not going to include in the area that we secure. So we're going to secure our playgrounds. And in terms of and that's more of the upper level, which we could secure in that area. But Mr. Beedenbow, is there something else that I'd like to add in that area?
Yes, sir. We may, after we get in there, we may have to address some of the needs, and because of the $150 million cap, we may have to address some of those needs in our capital budget, but we could do that in a couple of years after we get everything done. So there could be some future capital dollars that we'd have to spend at Harbison West as well.
Okay, I had a couple of things, if nobody else. Mostly mechanics about the bond referendum, but I wanted to say that one of the caveats that I would feel would be necessary would be, and we talked about this at the facilities committee meeting, were that we would guarantee the populace that if we put something on the bond referendum, that the list could not be changed or altered. Second caveat would be that, and we're looking at 5 years out, so we don't know what inflation's going to do. We don't have a crystal ball. So we would put a statement, a caveat that last in, first out. So whatever would be on the bottom of the list would be the facility that wouldn't be funded if that were to come to fruition. And one of the last things would be that, and we've already addressed this, it would be no deferred maintenance. I mean, it's false economy to defer maintenance. We've already addressed, Mr. Hogan, and has reiterated this, that we've raised the limit to $15 million from 12 and a half this year, I believe, right, correct? And that we've got some additional funds due to inflation and so forth, but additional funds going into maintenance. And the fourth thing that we need to address, this board's doing what it should do. It's planning. It's putting a plan out there. Dr. Ross is going through the effort, and right now it's fluid. He's changing some things, but we should be planning for the future, and we should have an idea of where we want and where we think the district's going to go. We have two studies that have been done, the McBride and McBroom, or Malone and McBroom. I'm sorry, I get the M&Ms mixed up. And then also the MB Con report. So, we have studied, we are planning, we are looking at the future. We just need to make sure that the caveats are there so that we build trust with the people in the district. So those are the comments that I would make. Ms. Blackburn-Hines.
Sorry, I just have a couple more questions. Okay, so as we talk about community feedback, one of the things that I noticed in the poll from the last forum was that there is a huge disparity in who attended that virtual forum, with a large majority coming from the Chapin cluster, and then a smaller from the Dutch Fork, and an even smaller participation from the Irmo cluster, which a lot of these projects impact the Irmo families. And so my question is, how are we going to address trying to get that community feedback? I know that I'm glad to hear that there's a forum on May 17th from 12 until 1:30. I'm not sure if that is a virtual forum or if it's an in-person forum, but do you plan to have additional forums and an in-person forum beyond this May 17th?
The answer is yes, ma'am. So the Lunch and Learn is a virtual one. We feel like we can get a lot of feedback and information. We have been invited to talk with Harbor Association groups, to talk with the Quail Valley Civic Association, to host a community event at Harbison West. So a lot of these are things that we're discussing. One thing that I believe that's important is, as we do the community input piece, we like the format of the online, because we can get 900 people or 1,000 people in one space at one time to give feedback. When we move across to a physical location, some of the issues that we hear is that you were in Chapin and then we didn't hear that in Irmo, or you were in Irmo, we didn't hear that in Chapin. We also feel that once the board selects which option it would like to go, that we would do multiple in-person events throughout our community to really drill down on the Q&As once we have a direction. A lot of, I think, the feedback we hear is, well, which one is the board going to select? So we're right now in the input stage, where we're taking it in through the digital and virtual form. And then once we feel like we have those projects aligned, then we'll do a lot of in-person forums as well, multiple throughout our communities.
Okay, Ms. Hammond, you had your hand up? You're muted, I think. We can't. She's talking, but we can't hear.
Zach, so that when the people do vote,
Could you start over,
whichever
Ms.
one
Hammond,
the
because you were muted for the first 30 seconds. Could you start over?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to reiterate the importance of the trust anytime we go out for a bond. And so I think that Dr. Ross is on the right track of getting information, being fluid with what he's hearing. And I appreciate wanting to hear from all the areas. And I just want the public, I want to reiterate what you said. In the past, because I've certainly been on the board long enough with bonds where former boards have passed a bond and then we don't even do everything that was in the bond. So I think it's so important that the wording is going to be exact, and if we do, which one we choose, that the people will know and it will not get changed. You said that, but I just wanted to say it again because that's so important. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Moore?
As you speak of holding more options to hear the community, more community forums, just putting it out there, I'm sure you and your team are already a step ahead, but I would just suggest working with the mayor of Irmo and possibly the Chamber of Commerce and holding something on a weekend so that parents who do work late and who may not have that internet access that they need are able to attend that type of event. And I think doing it at the school would be great because it's right there in the Irmo and Harbison area. But I definitely think being able to invite them on a weekend, and those two, especially the mayor, would just be able to reach out and really get the town involved, because as Ms. Blackburn-Hines said, that was a lot of Chapin who was represented, and we definitely want to make sure that we're including everybody who we represent.
Ms. Blackburn-Hines?
Well, the mayor of Irmo is here, so we could put him on the spot, but I digress. All right, so you mentioned that regarding public feedback, once we pick an option, so say we pick option 3, that then you plan on having more in-person events to get feedback from the community. So when we pick an option, if we pick option 3, we are not bound by this on June 13th or whenever we vote for that bond. Those projects are still in limbo until the board takes another vote to finalize the referendum projects by, I think you said August was when we had to put it on the ballot.
A good question. So if we move forward with option 3, you are bound by the direction I'm hearing is you're bound to the question, once that question is formed, on no later than 12 noon on August 15th, yes. And we're using this format to make sure that those projects are not only the right projects for maximum educational outcomes, but prioritized the correct way as well. And so what I would hope that if, let's just say option 3 is picked, then as we move around now, it's what is the priority of these? Which goes to the front, which goes to the end of those. I'm trying to use the evening, the lunch and learns, and maybe a weekend to bring back, these are the projects, and then we look at the priority. But to the short end, if there's another thing that goes in, we want to make sure that that's done because whatever's on the question, that's the piece. I would say this, though, what's important to note is we don't have Franny Hauser here for Burforma. They're going to need some time to draft a question as well. And so we don't want to push up against their time to make sure that we have the question or questions that may be added. So we can do some more face-to-face in this input piece, but I would hope that once we make the decision that those are the projects, and then from there on out, we talk about how do we prioritize them.
Okay. Any other questions?
I'm sorry.
Ms. Blackburn-Hines?
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. So once we, on June 13th, which is the deadline that you told the board that you wanted us to vote on the option, the projects and the dollar amounts on this would be finalized. So if we had public input, say from the Harbison West community, and it was a very strong feedback that they wanted a new school at Harbison West at that site, and they didn't want their students to go to Crossroads, that would not change after June 13th. It would just be about where everything is in order of this list.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think we've exhausted the subject, I believe, and very good job, and on a very technical and hard to explain basis. I appreciate what you've done there.